All right. Hello, sociologists. Welcome back to week 2 of Stevie Say Online, and welcome to our last unit of sociology. So here we are, Unit 5, Social Stratification. So, strata means layers. Some of you know the stratosphere, etc. But strata are layers. You can see this here in a road cut through these various layers of the earth. These are all strata. So we're talking about social stratification. Of course, that would mean layering in society. So if you think about this for a minute, what are some ways that society layers itself? Like one group is above or on top of, one group is below another. So if we ask you to think right now, some examples, maybe one that comes to mind is sex and gender, which we just finished our unit on. Of course, maybe you think about social class itself. Some people have more money and wealth than others. There is race and ethnicity in American society, even age, degree of ability. All of these things, to some degree, historically, religion was a factor, depending on the society and the time, etc. So society layers itself, and this is what we're going to be looking at. We've already looked at gender, but we'll be dipping back into it occasionally as need. So why is there social stratification? Why can't we all just live in a happy utopian world where everything is all equal, all the like why do we have these levels of, well, of course, some degree of inequality seems natural. If we all ran a race, we would not all be equal. Even if we were committed to equality, it'd be very difficult to finish a race altogether. But in society, it doesn't just seem like that. There seems to be definitely situations where people uh, seem to be born on third base, and sometimes they act like they hit a triple. Why is that? Why does social stratification occur? Well, sociologically, of course, there's more than one reason. And that's some things we're going to be exploring throughout this whole unit. The first is the comfort of the familiar. Uh, People tend to separate like for like, even with kindergartners. You put a group of kindergartners together who have never played together, put them in a playroom together. Within a fairly short period of time, they will separate both by gender and typically by physical features, what you might consider race. And so there is something about that. I'm really not sure that explains why some people live in a low rent apartment building and other people belong to a yacht club. I think it's more than just the comfort of the familiar. Gratification does make a complex society more simple, though. It is a tendency, maybe, that isn't good to not want to deal with things complexly, but by oversimplifying, by just not dealing with whole swaths of people, you do make your world simpler by segregating it of sorts. This is certainly something that the Marxist sociologists would be very quick to point out, is that stratification reduces competition. That if some people have an easier trip, some people have privilege, then it's easier to pass on those advantages to your kids. Maybe it's a natural thing to love your kids in this way, to want what's best for them, to spend $500,000 to make sure that they get into a college they're not qualified for by cheating. I don't know, but that's a pretty extreme example of things that parents were willing to do to pass on advantage to their kids that they didn't actually earn. And then it potentially avoids conflict by separating out people who are different. We avoid some of the tension that would occur through legitimate and honest and regular interaction. It's easier just to live in our gated communities. If I say, what social class would you say that you're in? I want you to think about that right now. What social class would you say that your family belongs to? And when you thought about it, what were some things that you considered? Now, sociologically, we're talking about 5 determinants of social class. Today, we are going to do one of those. and that is income. Money probably came to mind. Money actually fits into two of our big categories. The first is income. The second would be what we would call wealth. Income, though, is your steady stream of money, money that you earn on a regular basis. So this is defined as wages or salaries from work, from investments, from rental properties, etc. This is your income. How much money you have every year, every month, every week. This is your income. What would you guess is the median family income in America? If you said half the families have this, half the families have more, half the families have less, what would you say it is? The answer depends on time. 2008, the country experienced the Great Recession. There was a significant drop in the economy, and that economy has been recovering ever since. So you can see here that median family income has been going up uh, as we go. Now, I feel like the most recent economic downturn related to COVID is really going to throw off all of these numbers for 2020. But you can see the trend that we had going here up to this point. So here's kind of a graphical representation of this journey through 2017. Okay, next concept that we want to talk about when we talk about social stratification is something called quintiles. And here we have this word, and it's related to the number 5. So quintuplets would be if I had 5 kids, my wife had 5 kids at the same time, that would be quintuplets. We talk about quintiles, we're talking about 5 groups. And so if we had 100 people and we lined them all up from tallest to shortest, and every 20 people, we said, okay, you are now the end of a group, and the 21st person was the start of a new group, we could separate out any group of people from shortest to tallest based on chunking it into 5 chunks. And so in this case, we don't have 100 people, but we have 320 million people in the United States. But we're still going to split them into 5 groups, and it's based entirely on number. When you have gone one person over 1/5, you are now into a new quintile. And so when we talk about social class in terms of quintiles, there will always be 5 social classes, and there will always be an equal number of people in each social class. Now, I don't know if this feels realistic, because if you ask Americans, a large number of them are going to say that they are, in fact, middle class. And you can't have 55% of America be middle class unless you have a very broad definition of what it means to be middle class. But when we look at quintiles, there can be truly a middle group, and they will be exactly 20% of the population. The richest 20%, the upper class will be 20% of the population. The poorest 20% will be 20% of the population. Now, the reason we talk about these quintiles is because then we can say, by comparison, the wealthiest 20%. About what percentage of the income in America do they earn? If America was somehow where everything was equal, then the top 20% would earn 20%, and the bottom 20% would earn 20%. But if the bottom percent earns less than 20%, then they are earning less proportionate than you would expect. And if the upper group is making much more than 20%, then they are disproportionately making more than their quintile. So you can use quintiles to look at what percentage of the pie each 20% has. All right, so sociologically, let's get into American society. Now, what percentage, what would you guess that the first group of quintile, the richest quintile in America makes? The answer is 52%. The top 20% of income earners earn 52% of the income in the United States. The top 5% of earners earn 23.1% of the total. If we look at the true middle class, they make 14.1%. The bottom, the very poor in America, are living on 3.1% of the total income. And so this is an example of how the pie gets passed out in American life. You can see that the bottom 60% earn disproportionately less than what you'd expect, and the top 40% earn above their disproportionate share. Now, a second factor, this is just straight up income, but it doesn't always consider the fact that if I suddenly added a kid to my household, I already have the same house, we already have the same minivan. Your costs don't always scale directly upward, and there's a concept called equivalence adjusted income, which is when you consider some things like food, water, utilities, cost of living kind of expenses, and you look at the size of households and other things, it probably gives you a more honest or true equivalent of what your money gets you. I'm not sure that it really matters, but you can see that there is a small difference where the buying power or the share of people at the bottom increases slightly when you consider the fact that it's the same to stuff four people into an apartment as to put one person in an apartment. But you can see that the total share of the pie doesn't change dramatically, regardless of what sociologically measure you use, either. But now, one thing that is interesting is the change over time. If we look at um, income last year in 2018, the last year we have data for, and 1967, you can see that there has been a shift in the quintiles so that if we look at are poor people doing worse now than they did before, we can't exactly know this for sure just from quintile data. We have to consider cost of living, overall kind of sense of, what is it, what does your money get you, these kind of things. But on just straight up income, you can see that the poorest 40% used to live on 17 or 18% of the income, and now they live on closer to 11 or 12% of the income. The middle class is about 3% worse. Really, everyone is doing worse except for the top 20% who are doing better than they have ever done. Now, not to get too nerdy on you, but there's lots of different ways that you can measure. You can income. The IRS has 14 different categories at least, but the point of this graph is just to show that regardless of which measure you use, they're fairly similar. The breaks in quintiles occur about the same space. Now, as we start to talk about income in America, maybe you know a lot about money, maybe you know a little bit about money, maybe you don't know what your parents make, maybe your parents don't want to talk about what they make or whatever else. But here is a snapshot, at least, of what people in America make. You can see basically here you have the quintile breakouts, like how much money, and this is by household, does a family, at least only like 10% of American family, like 90% of American families make at least $14,629. If you say, what percentage of Americans make at least 100 grand on family income, the answer is 30%. That if you make $100,000 for family income, you are in the top 30%, which puts you in the second quintile from the top. So these breakouts, this is how this works. So what does it mean to be middle class in America? It's families that make between $50,000 and $79,000 a year. If those are the true middle class of American life. Now, there's places that we got this are from the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau and the IRS have a ridiculous amount of nerdy statistics on anything that you could ever want. If you go to census.gov, they have elaborate reports, 40, 60 pages long, filled with charts and things that you can look at. And so this is an example of kind of a breakout chart from which I took this data. Also very interesting is what it costs to live around the country. We know that making money in California is not the same as making money in Ohio. And when I was out there this summer at In-N-Out Burger, which is just like like burger, like a little their own version of Swenson's or Burger King, whatever, they were starting people in fast food for $19 an hour. That is would be ridiculous by Ohio standards, but California is an incredibly expensive place to live in some ways. It's not in the sense that a car still costs the same out there as it does here. You just have so much more income to buy it, which, when I was out in San Francisco this summer, it was just like every eighth car was a Tesla. It seemingly, it all got so very common after a while. All right, so here you can see that some places are poor for sure. There are poor places, but even going by state is not really that accurate. And so here's really an income by county. And you can see that um, some counties, some parts of the state do extremely well, while other places do not. And so this is all very interesting statistics to me. Um, And then, of course, the flip side of these two charts is poverty. So if this one is the lighter, is how much money are you making? You can see Mississippi has the least money, which means now Mississippi has the most poverty as well. West Virginia, these types of places. But poverty is also concentrated in cities. You can see that there are some cities are better or worse to live in, and these are indicated on the chart as well. We start to talk about social stratification and we start to talk about income. We also need to look back at the gender wage gap, the reality of men's earnings versus women's earnings. Now, we know this is complicated. It's not all just a factor of gender discrimination, but the reality is if you make less money, you're making less money. And so female headed households are going to be more difficult to than when you have dual income earners or other situations. And so at some point, things do really matter. And this helps create, this is what creates social stratification. You can look here at some of these women's jobs. We looked at some of these issues at the end of gender last week when we talked about so-called pink collar jobs and the glass ceiling, where nursing is the highest majority women profession, a profession that is majority women. The highest earning is um, nurses. We start to talk about social stratification in its complexity. Of course, we need to look at breakouts on race or ethnicity. This is going to be a recurring theme in our unit. But you can see that some races do better or ethnicities do better than others. And this kind of data is available on this chart. So take a look here. And again, all this kind of breakout data on all kinds of all this ethnic data is all available in the census. I'm not going to go through this today, but there is tons and tons and tons of statistics that one could get lost in. Okay, that is it for today. That was 1 out of 5 determinants of social class. We will get into the other 4 tomorrow. Wanted to cut today short so that you would have more time to work on your gender art if you're still finishing that. I really look forward to seeing what everyone has to say and how you chose to say it. So tomorrow we'll be back, and until then, have a great day. Thanks. Bye.